My guest today is Laurent Bugnion. Laurent, how are you, my friend?
I'm very well. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. You must be tired. You've just come back from a long trip.
Well, I just came back from 1 week of vacation following a crazy week at Build. So the vacation really helped. I'm still a little bit jet lagged, but not too bad.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk off camera about your vacation, but let's talk about Build. What were you doing at the Build conference?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you probably remember, I'm part of developer relations. Developer relations at Microsoft has a big role to play in all of our events, and Build is definitely one of those, especially because Build is our premium developer events that we have,
Right.
right? So we have those two big events through the year: Build in the spring usually, and then Ignite in the autumn usually. And so this kind of reason my my year, as we go. But specifically, my role at Build was to be what we call a co-content workstream lead for our in-person labs. So we have different labs that we had. We had 48 unique labs. At Build, we use a work lab to differentiate a little bit from workshop, but essentially, a lab is something where people can attend. They actually get devices, so we provide devices for them for the duration of the lab, and we also
Mhm.
provide all the resources that they need, and then they go through steps. There is, one or two speakers who are leading them through the steps. We also have proctors to help them when they encounter technical difficulties. So this is the format we had, and each lab that we offered was 75 minutes in duration, which is kind of a sweet spot because um, it's not too long in the sense that it doesn't prevent attendees to do other things at the conference because there are so much content to consume at the conference. But at the same time, it's also just long enough to allow us to dive a little bit deeper and to show some interesting use cases to the attendees. So that's pretty much what I was doing. I'm working, of course, in collaboration with a whole team of people on that. But from especially from the technical standpoint, I'm the person in charge there to make sure that everything runs fine.
So you were coordinating lots of different hands-on labs. Was there an overall goal that these labs had?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a goal to help our attendees touch the technologies that we release. And so we always try to have labs which are related to sessions,
Hmm.
like the typical breakout sessions that you have, where attendees sit down and listen to a speaker show them a demo, but they cannot really touch it themselves. And
Sure.
also, of course, all the announcements we have in the keynote with new release and things like that. So it's also a chance for attendees to actually get familiar and code, right? Hands-on coding on technologies that we just released. So really, it it shows that there is a lot of interest from attendees for these kind of experiences where they can actually sit down and try it by themselves. And also, what makes me very happy is that there is also a lot of interest from Microsoft and specifically from our marketing organization and for us in the DevRel side as well to actually enable attendees to do that because in part they can do that at home for some of the labs like we do offer some of the labs after the event on demand where people can do it on their own, but of course having access to somebody who is actually knowledgeable, very often somebody from the product group itself, so people who actually build the product try to present that to the attendees, as well as our technical proctors who are really amazing experts on those topics. This is an experience that you can't really get at home, right? So
Yeah.
it shows, and we have seen really a lot of interest for those labs in terms of number. We've had more than 4,000 lab seats occupied during the conference, so people who really sit down and do the labs. I say lab seats because most people actually do more than one lab. In average, every attendee that we had at the labs did 3 labs. So it's a
Oh,
lot, right?
wow.
It means that they go to one lab and then they like the experience and then they do another one and yet another one. And
That's
so,
encouraging.
yeah, it's a really nice experience in that regard. Mhm.
How many different labs are there?
So we had 48 unique labs,
Wow.
yeah, which is a lot, and each lab was repeated twice. And then in addition, we had also our most popular labs. We repeated them yet another time. So we had a total of 99 lab sessions over 3.5 days.
Oh, I see. So when you show up for a lab, there's a sign. If I wanted to see a lab on, I don't know, Security Copilot, for example. I
Mhm.
don't know if you have one on that, but there's a session set time there. Will there be an expert on that product there,
Correct.
and that knows the lab that can answer those questions?
Yeah, correct. So the attendees can register for the lab, what
Got
we
it.
call the RSVP, right? But that being said, if they don't register, they can also just show up. And since a lot of people who RSVP don't show up because obviously there is a lot of competition between different topics at the conference. So we always have room for people who can just walk in as well. And obviously there is also a first in, first out. Well, first in, first served, I should say. So sometimes we had to reject attendees because the lab room was full, but we always have repeats. And if we had in one of the labs where we had to reject a pretty large number of attendees because the lab was very popular, we actually on the fly we added a new session of the lab, so we always have a few slots that we can use for that, and so we made sure that everybody who wanted to attend the lab was able to do so.
Oh, interesting. Which were the most popular labs?
So interestingly, the one that we had to repeat was one about MCP, because MCP is a big topic right now. So the model context protocol, right? And so using MCP in the context of function applications, we joked with the lab developers that this lab was the only one with MCP in the title, and maybe that's why it was so popular. But I do think it was a very good lab. So interestingly, the feedback was very good on this lab as well. So that was very popular. All our agent labs in general are very
Mhm.
popular. People want to try it. We even had I had some of my coworkers who are non-technical people, program managers, etc. Attend one of the Copilot agent labs, and as you know, Copilot Studio allows you to develop these agents with minimal coding. And so it was interesting for them also to try it out, and I think it worked pretty well. They were quite happy with the experience.
Yeah, that is a cool thing. I was at a user group last night where I demoed
Oh,
that very product.
there you go.
It was cool. It had changed since the last time I demoed it, so I had to
It changes all
relearn
the
the
time,
UI
and
a
in
little bit.
fact, it did change. I think on the first day of the conference, they changed the UI, so that is always an interesting experience when we do labs, where we have to scramble to actually make sure that the latest and greatest is shown to the attendees. Yeah.
Tell me a little about the preparation that you had to
Mhm.
do in coordinating these 40 some
Yeah,
labs before the event.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, it's a lot of work, right? So we started. I mean, obviously, we always think about the next event, right? So right now, we're already thinking about Ignite in November, but I would say the serious preparation started around February. So usually it's February, March, April, and then May, of course, is the month of the conference. So it's a good 3 to 4 months prep time. It's the first step that we do is identify how many labs we can do in terms of room, in terms of budget, in terms of how many sessions we can actually physically have, right? And then after that, we do an internal call for content inside of Microsoft. This year, the call for content was made in a very nice manner where we had some very technical experts, people like James Montemagno and Scott Henselman, etc., went and weighed on every breakout session and also
Mm.
on the labs to help us basically select the best labs from a technical standpoint, right? So we try to, like I said, right, Build is really a developer event, and so we really try to help developers find content that they need. And
Mm.
so once the content has been selected, so in our case, we had more or less 100 lab proposals. We had room for about 50, so we had to reject about
Mm.
half, which is never easy, obviously. But then once it's done and once the labs are approved, then we basically identify the lab developer, and then they go and actually create the labs. So lab creation, every lab is created a little bit in a different manner. But we run that on a virtualization platform with one of our vendors. And since we provide, it's actually pretty unique that we provide devices to the users, right? So we want to make sure that the users don't need anything. They can just come with basically maybe a piece of paper to take notes and a pen, sit down and do the lab. And so we have to prepare all that. So we have also to work, of course, with all the technical partners to make sure that the machines are, correctly set up. Like I said, this vendor who does the virtualization platform helps us also to test the labs and also make sure that everything is running fine. We have to acquire tons and tons of Azure subscriptions and licenses because obviously we're a client like any other for Microsoft, so we have to also pay for those, etc., etc. So it's quite a lot of preparation. The testing is super important because we want to have as many eyes as possible on our labs to make sure that the attendees have a good experience. So we go through various rounds of testing, internal, but also with the help of our expert partners like the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, for example, who help us to test those labs before the event. And then after that, it's just the show starts, and we cross our fingers that everything goes well.
And it sounds like it did go well if you had people coming back 2 and 3 times.
Yes, indeed. We had a couple of technical issues. We always have those because we work with really bleeding edge tech, right? So some products that have just been released at the conference are shown to the users. And so we had some things which didn't work as expected. So this is why we always have a little bit of flexibility to actually reschedule an additional lab. And, we feel sorry for the attendees who potentially wasted a little bit of time. But usually we see that attendees are understanding of those technical circumstances that can happen. We had really a minimum number of labs where we had technical issues this year. So it was a good surprise. It really talks for all the prep and all the testing that we have done beforehand. But also it speaks to the quality of the products that we release. It's interesting that with the the release cycles that we have these days, when we you probably remember the days when we had the PDC and then it was like the huge announcements and people had worked for a year on the product and it was released at PDC, right? And
Right.
now it's not like
Every
that anymore.
3 years, a new version would be released.
Yeah,
Now it's every week.
pretty much every week, which means that basically we always build on stable stuff, right? And that really
Right.
helps us to give a good experience to the attendees. We had very good satisfaction also in the evaluation that we received. So I think we hit a good formula. Obviously, I have tons of ideas on how we can improve everything, but I think that we have a good thing going on. Yeah.
Well, tell me that. What's their number one idea to change next time?
So I would say there are a couple of things, but basically making sure to match an attendee with the lab level and the lab tech that they expect, I think is a bit of a challenge because we only have essentially we have a session catalog where people can go and see what the lab is about, but the number of like the amount of information that we can communicate in this limited space, and also given that there is so much competition with other topics, right? So for an attendee to select the right lab can be tricky, I think. And so we have a few ideas. We have nothing is implemented yet, so these are just ideas. But basically to do maybe labs which are a little bit less technical and maybe a little bit shorter in time for people who just want to understand the specific context or a specific concept. For instance, at Ignite, we had people sitting in our labs who didn't even have a GitHub account, for example, and understandably, because not everybody has a GitHub account. I mean, for you and me, it's like, I don't know how many accounts you have. I have a few, right?
I have 2.
But we also have people who visit our conferences who don't necessarily are as technical. And I think that having a lab offering for these people could be a good value and help them simply answer the question, what is GitHub and how do I do a commit, and maybe even how do I do a pull request, right? And then when they go back to their company, they can talk to the developer and say, "Oh, I made my first pull request, right?" And this is a kind of a success in itself. So these are some ideas that we have. We are, always thinking on also topics, maybe a little bit less talking about products per se, but a little bit more about showing how to solve a scenario, which I think is a trend that we'll probably see, in the next few years, of how we tell a story, basically, because this is really what people want these days, right? I don't think that people want to hear much more about what is AI and what is a model and how do LLMs work, but rather, how can I actually use that in my work to solve a situation, to solve a problem, right?
Yeah, the application of the technology is where the real value is.
Right.
Well, now, so the event is over. It's been over for a week or two.
Yep.
And is there still more work to be done to wrap things up? What's
Yeah.
going on now?
I mean, mostly I'm, these days collecting metrics, checking attendance numbers, checking evaluations, writing reports, and already thinking of the next things, right? So, in front of us, we have a large number of events that we do, what we call our first party events. Obviously, Ignite has already been announced in November in San Francisco. That will be a very large event, so we are already
Yep.
starting to think about it, and make plans for that. But also we have smaller event, or I shouldn't say smaller because some of them are pretty big, but basically a whole string of events which are a little bit more localized, which we call the AI Tour. So this is also a thing where we offer content. So there is always a cycle of refresh that we do for all of our content throughout the year. And basically, just like before, we were saying that products have a release every few weeks. Well, our content also has, a release cycle of every few weeks. And so we always work on updating the content, maybe creating new sessions and new labs where needed, but also updating existing labs to make sure that they are up to date for the next release cycle.
Awesome. Well, and are you? I know you speak at conferences sometimes. Do you have anything scheduled in the near future?
Um, yeah, so I've been actually speaking less at conferences because
Oh,
mostly I took this behind the scene role, and actually I'm
I
enjoying
see.
it very much because, instead of me being on stage and getting some success this way, I have actually something like 200 people doing that for me now. So, well,
That
in
scales
collaboration
really
with
well.
me. So it's nice, to scale the success like that. But that being said, I'm going to speak at the AI Tour in Lausanne, which is, I don't know when you release the podcast, but the AI Tour in Lausanne is going
Probably
to
it's next week.
be. Okay, well, so that's still current. So this is going to be on June 16. I'm very happy about that because Lausanne is actually the place where I'm born, so it will be nice to
Ah,
speak there. After that, I have a session at .NET Day, which is going to be in Zurich in August.
mhm.
Yeah, and a few things which are not totally announced yet, but I'm going to be at a few locations this year. Yes.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Well, Laurent, I really appreciate your time. I'm glad the event was such a success, and I'm looking forward to next year.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend.
Bye bye.
Hello to all the technology friends. Very happy to talk to you.